My name is Henry Walker, and this is my life story. I was just a boy when I realized the world didn't owe me a thing. The orphanage smelled of damp wood and boiled cabbage, and the walls echoed with cries that no one bothered to answer. I remember lying on that thin mattress, staring at the ceiling full of cracks, trying to imagine a sky beyond it. Other kids had someone to visit them, someone to hold them. Me, I had no one. That's when I first learned what loneliness really feels like. It isn't just being alone in a room, it's feeling invisible, like you don't exist. And I'll tell you something, that feeling can crush a man, or it can ignite him. For me, it lit a fire I couldn't put out. I used to whisper to myself, I'll matter one day. They'll remember my name. Those words became my secret prayer, the fuel that kept me going when the food was scarce, when the nights felt endless, and when hope seemed like a luxury. The nuns at the orphanage weren't cruel, but they weren't warm either. To them, we were mouths to feed, chores to manage. I'd watch families walk in, look over the children like they were picking fruit at the market, and walk out with someone else. Never me. Too skinny, too quiet, too forgettable. At least that's what I believed then. But here's a truth I wish every young person knew. Being overlooked can be a gift. It taught me patience, it taught me resilience, and it gave me a hunger to be seen, to prove I had worth, that shaped everything I became later in life. At night, when the other boys slept, I would sit by the window and look out at the streetlights. Each glow in the distance looked like a dream, a world I couldn't touch yet. But I promised myself, someday I'd reach it. When I turned 16, something inside me snapped. I'd spent too many nights staring at those cracked ceilings, waiting for someone to choose me, and I finally understood. No one was coming. If I wanted a future, I had to claim it with my own two hands. So one cold morning, before the sun had risen, I slipped out the side gate, with nothing but a small bag of clothes and a heart full of stubbornness. No goodbyes, no second thoughts. Just the open road ahead. The world outside the orphanage was not kind. I slept in bus stations, in alleys, even under bridges when the weather allowed it. I learned quickly that hunger is a teacher. It teaches you humility when you beg for scraps. It teaches you courage when you fight for a spot to sleep. And it teaches you gratitude when a stranger offers you a sandwich without asking your name. I found work wherever I could, washing dishes in diners, carrying boxes in warehouses, scrubbing floors at gas stations. Every dollar was survival, every blister a reminder that my story wasn't over yet. People would pass me by, never seeing the young boy with no family, no future, just another shadow on the sidewalk. But I saw myself differently. I whispered the same words I had as a child. I'll matter one day. And here's something I learned during those years. Hard work doesn't guarantee success, but laziness guarantees failure. Even when my body ached, even when I thought about giving up, I pushed forward. Because if I stopped, no one was going to carry me. Still, the streets tested me. One night I got cornered by 3 men in an alley. They beat me until my ribs screamed, and they stole the few dollars I had saved. I lay there, bleeding and broken, wondering if maybe the world had finally won. But then, fate sent me an unexpected guardian. As I lay in that alley, shivering from the cold and the pain, I thought it was over. I was just another forgotten kid who would disappear, and no one would ever know or care. My body was weak, but what hurt most was my spirit. For the first time, I almost believed the lies I had heard all my life, that I was worth nothing. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, steady, and then a voice, raspy but kind. "Son, what are you doing down there?" I looked up and saw an old man in a janitor's uniform, holding a mop in one hand and a thermos in the other. His name was Mr. Harris. He didn't know me, had no reason to stop, but he knelt beside me like I mattered. He poured me a cup of hot coffee from that thermos and said, "Don't quit now. Your story isn't finished." Those words hit me harder than the fists of the men who robbed me. No one had ever told me my story wasn't finished. No one had ever spoken to me like I had a future. Mr. Harris took me to the small building he cleaned at night. He patched me up with what little he had, some bandages, old soap, warm water, and then he gave me something more valuable than money, advice. He said, "Life is gonna knock you down more times than you can count, but every time you stand back up, you steal a little bit of power from it. Stand up enough times, and you'll find you can't be beaten anymore." I stayed quiet, just listening. That night, something changed in me. I realized sometimes angels don't come with wings. Sometimes they come with dirty boots and calloused hands, carrying a mop instead of a sword. From that night forward, I carried Mr. Harris's words with me like armor. Whenever I felt weak, I remembered my story wasn't finished. After that night with Mr. Harris, I started to see the world differently. The pain was still there, the hunger didn't disappear, but I carried his words like a compass. Don't quit now. Your story isn't finished. During the day, I kept working whatever jobs I could find. Washing dishes, hauling boxes, sweeping floors. Nothing glamorous, nothing easy. But at night, I searched for something more. That's when I stumbled on a treasure most people overlooked. Books. Behind the diners and shops, people threw away boxes of old magazines, torn-up novels, even school textbooks. To everyone else it was trash. To me, it was gold. I picked up every book I could carry. Business guides with missing pages, history books stained with coffee, self-help manuals from the 1950s. I devoured them all by candlelight in the small room I eventually managed to rent. And that's when I learned a truth I still believe at 80 years old. Poverty isn't just about empty pockets. It's about an empty mind. Fill your mind, and eventually your pockets will follow. I underlined words I didn't understand, repeating them until they stuck. I copied passages into an old notebook, promising myself I would live by them. One book said, "Success is built on habits, not luck." Another said, "Knowledge is the only wealth thieves can't steal." Those sentences became bricks in the foundation of the man I was building. While other young men spent their nights drinking or chasing girls, I spent mine chasing ideas. I started to see the patterns of business, the principles of discipline, the power of persistence. And slowly, I realized I didn't have to stay a victim of my circumstances. The boy who once stared at the cracked ceiling of an orphanage was now staring at the pages of books that showed him the world could be bigger, wider, and full of possibilities. By my early 20s, I had a little more than a roof over my head and calluses on my hands. The jobs kept me alive, but the books kept me dreaming. They planted an idea inside me that wouldn't go away. I didn't want to work for scraps forever. I wanted to build something of my own. One day, while hauling junk for a warehouse, I noticed how much money the owner made just by collecting old scrap metal. It hit me like a revelation. People threw away what they saw as useless, but to the right person, it was treasure. I thought to myself, why couldn't I be that person? With every dollar I saved, I started looking for a way out. Then I saw it, an old beat-up truck parked behind a garage. Rust on the doors, dents on the sides, engine coughing like a sick man. But to me, it looked like freedom. The mechanic said, "Kid, "This thing ain't worth the trouble." I looked him in the eye and said, "It's worth everything I've got." I signed the papers with shaking hands, using credit I wasn't sure I could pay back. That night, sitting in the driver's seat, I felt two things at once: terror and possibility. For the first time, I wasn't just working to survive, I was taking a chance to live. I started small, picking up scrap metal, hauling trash, doing odd jobs no one else wanted. People laughed. "The orphan boy thinks he's a businessman." I heard it more than once. But every job, every handshake, every mistake became a lesson. I wasn't just moving junk, I was moving toward a future. And here's what I discovered. Every big dream starts small, and most people quit before they ever see it grow. I refused to quit. That truck broke down more times than I can count, but each time I fixed it, I fixed myself a little too. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. Within a few years, that old rusted truck had carried me farther than I ever dreamed. I worked from dawn until midnight, hauling anything that fit in the back. Every extra dollar I made, I didn't spend. I reinvested. Slowly, painfully, I managed to buy a second truck, then a third. For the first time in my life, people weren't laughing at me. They were calling me boss. I had drivers who looked to me for a paycheck, families who counted on me putting food on their tables. It was exhilarating and terrifying. But here's what no one tells you about success. It doesn't come without storms. My first big contract fell apart when the company that hired me suddenly shut down. Overnight, I lost months of revenue. I had bills to pay, men to feed, and creditors breathing down my neck. I remember sitting at my desk, head in my hands, thinking, maybe they were right. Maybe the orphan boy doesn't belong in business. And that wasn't the only time. Twice I came within inches of bankruptcy. Once a dishonest partner ran off with money that wasn't his. Another time the economy dipped and jobs dried up. Each failure felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder that life wasn't done testing me. But here's the secret I learned. Pain is a currency too, if you're willing to spend it right. Every setback taught me something. Don't trust too easily. Save for the hard times. Diversify your work. And above all, never let fear make your decisions. The truth is, I had already faced the worst pain as a boy, being forgotten. Compared to that, losing money was just another obstacle. Every time I fell, I remembered those words from Mr. Harris. "Your story isn't finished." And I stood back up. Little by little, the company survived. Then it grew stronger. What once was one broken truck had become a small fleet. And the orphan nobody wanted was now a man building something others depended on. By the time I reached my 40s, I had something I never imagined as a boy in that orphanage: stability. What started with one broken truck had grown into a company with dozens of vehicles, warehouses, and more contracts than I could handle alone. People began to recognize my name in the community, not as the orphan, not as the kid who was forgotten, but as a businessman, a provider, someone who created opportunity where none existed before. But the real reward wasn't the money or the buildings with my company's name on them. It was walking through the yard and seeing the men and women who worked for me. I knew their stories, I knew their struggles, and I knew their families depended on the paycheck I signed at the end of the week. That's when it hit me. Success isn't measured by what you take, it's measured by what you give. I began setting aside part of the company's profits to help local shelters, to fund scholarships for kids who grew up like me, forgotten by the world. I walked back into orphanages, not as a child waiting to be chosen, but as a man extending his hand to others. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life had come full circle. I also made a rule for myself. I would hire people others overlooked, former convicts, single parents with no experience, kids straight out of foster care. People said I was crazy, that I was taking risks. But I knew better. I knew what it was like to be invisible, and I knew that sometimes all it takes is one chance to change a person's life. Looking back, I realized this was the turning point when my company became more than a business. It became a mission, a way of proving to the world and to myself that where you start doesn't have to define where you end up. By the time I reached my 60s, the empire I had built was no longer just mine. It had a life of its own. The company ran with managers, departments, systems I could have never imagined when I was that hungry boy scraping dishes in a diner. My name was on contracts, on trucks rolling across states, and even on donation plaques in schools and hospitals. But let me tell you the truth. At that age, you stop counting dollars and start counting moments. I began to look back more than I looked forward. I thought about those long nights in the orphanage, staring at a cracked ceiling. I thought about Mr. Harris and his thermos of coffee, about that beat-up truck that almost fell apart more times than I can remember. And I thought about all the times I almost quit, but didn't. Here's the lesson I wish every young person could understand. Success feels good, but survival feels greater. Knowing you endured, that you didn't give up when everything told you to, that's the real victory. I started spending more time mentoring. Young men and women would sit in my office, nervous, looking for advice. And I'd tell them the same thing I'm telling you now. Life will break you down to the bone, but if you refuse to stay down, you'll rise stronger than before. In my 60s, I no longer feared failure. I had failed enough to know it was just part of the process. What I feared was regret. Regret for not trying. Regret for not giving it my all. And so I pushed them, those kids who came for advice, to take risks, to bet on themselves, to remember that nobody else is going to choose them. They have to choose themselves. By then, I wasn't just a businessman, I was a storyteller, a living reminder that no matter how broken the beginning, the ending can still shine. Now I'm 80 years old. My hands aren't as steady, my steps aren't as quick, but my mind is sharper than it has ever been. And when I look back on this long road, I don't just see the success, the company, or the money. I see a story that began with loneliness, hunger, and fear, and ended with purpose. At this age, the nights are quieter. The phone doesn't ring as often, and I have more time to sit with my thoughts. Sometimes I wonder how that boy in the orphanage would feel if he could see me now. Would he believe it? Would he recognize himself in this old man sipping coffee on a porch in Ohio? Here's what I know. Every scar, every failure, every lonely night was not wasted. They were building blocks. At the time they felt like punishment. But now, I see them as preparation. Without them, I never would have had the strength to carry the weight of leadership, the wisdom to see opportunity, or the heart to help others. I've learned something about aging, too. Growing old is not about losing your youth. It's about gaining perspective. I don't envy the young anymore. I pity them sometimes because they don't yet understand how short and fragile life is. But I also admire them because they still have the chance to write their story. And that's why I tell mine. Not to boast, not to be remembered as a great man, but to remind whoever listens that beginnings do not define endings. An orphan boy, forgotten by everyone, became a man remembered by many. If that can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. So here I sit, at 80 years old, with the weight of years on my shoulders, but the light of gratitude in my heart. My story isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to anyone who's ever felt unseen, unwanted, or unworthy. Because if I could rise, so can you. At 80 years old, I've come to realize something most people never understand until it's too late. Time is the real currency of life. Money comes and goes, businesses rise and fall. But the hours you spend, you never get them back. When I was younger, I thought success was measured in dollars. I thought if I could buy the truck, build the company, own the house, then I'd finally be complete. And don't get me wrong, those things matter. They gave me freedom, they gave me dignity, but they didn't give me peace. Peace came later, when I started to count my life not by profits but by moments. The laughter of my employees at the company picnic, the handshake of a man I gave a job to when no one else would hire him, the tears in a young woman's eyes when I told her she'd earned a scholarship through our foundation. Those moments are the real wealth. And here's the lesson. If you sacrifice all your time chasing money, you might just end up rich and empty. I've seen men with bank accounts full of zeros, but hearts full of regret. They missed birthdays, dinners, quiet evenings with family, all in the name of chasing success. At the end, they couldn't buy back a single hour. Looking back, I'm grateful for the nights I chose to sit with a friend instead of staying late at the office. I'm grateful for the Sundays I spent walking in the park, the mornings I watched the sunrise instead of checking ledgers. Those small choices added up to a life, not just a career. I tell young people this all the time. Don't wait until you're old to learn the value of time. Use it wisely now. Invest it in people, in love, in memories. Because when you're 80, you won't remember the numbers on a spreadsheet. You'll remember the faces of those who walked beside you. And as I sit here, feeling the weight of my years, I'm not thinking about the contracts I won or the money I lost. I'm thinking about the people I loved, the lives I touched, and the moments that touched me back. That's the wealth I'll carry with me to the end. When I look in the mirror these days, I don't just see an old man with grey hair and wrinkled skin. I see every battle I've fought, every storm I've survived, written on my face like a map. My scars, some visible, most invisible, are the proof that I lived and that I endured. I remember the nights I went hungry, the beatings in alleys, the betrayals by partners I trusted. Those wounds cut deep. At the time I cursed them, thought they were unfair, but now I see them differently. Each scar is a teacher. Each scar whispers, "You are stronger than what tried to break you." Here's a truth I've learned. A smooth life teaches you nothing. If I had been adopted into a comfortable home, if I had grown up with love and safety, I might never have found the strength to build the life I did. Pain, as cruel as it feels, is often the sharpest tool God uses to shape us. I carry not just my own scars, but the stories of others too. Employees who lost everything before I gave them a chance. Friends who fell to addiction, but clawed their way back. Young men and women who thought their lives were over until someone reminded them it wasn't. Those stories live inside me, reminders that brokenness can lead to beauty. And here's the lesson. Don't hide your scars. Don't be ashamed of them. Show them proudly because they are proof you survived. When people see only your success, they might think it came. There were nights when I had nothing but the clothes on my back, an empty stomach and a heart heavy with doubt. Nights when I questioned if life had any meaning at all. But even in the darkest hours, one thing kept me moving forward. Faith. Now, I don't just mean faith in the religious sense. though I prayed more times than I can count, asking God to give me strength. I mean faith as a whole. Faith that tomorrow could be better than today. Faith that my story wasn't finished. Faith that my pain had a purpose, even if I couldn't see it yet. When I was that forgotten boy in the orphanage, I held on to hope like it was oxygen. Hope that there was more waiting for me beyond those cracked ceilings. And when I hit rock bottom on the streets, beaten and robbed, I held on to faith that I could rise again. Without that, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. Here's what I've learned. Hope is the bridge between where you are and where you want to be. Without it, you stay stuck in the pit. With it, you start climbing, even when the walls are steep, even when your hands are bleeding. There were times I wanted to quit, times I thought maybe the world was right, that I would never matter. But then I'd hear that whisper inside me, the same one Mr. Harris spoke aloud years ago. Your story isn't finished. That voice was faith, and I clung to it with everything I had. At 80 years old, I can tell you this. Money didn't save me. Success didn't save me. Faith did. Faith gave me the courage to take the first step when everything around me screamed, "Don't bother." And hope gave me the strength to take the next step after that. So if you're listening now, broken, tired, maybe ready to give up, remember this. Your faith doesn't have to be big. It just has to be alive. Even a flicker of hope is enough to light your way out of the darkness. One of the hardest battles I ever fought wasn't against poverty or hunger or even failure. It was against loneliness. You see, when you grow up unwanted, you carry that weight with you. Even after I built the company, even after people started calling me boss, there were nights I'd come home to an empty room, sit in the dark, and feel like that same boy in the orphanage. Forgotten, invisible, unloved. And here's the truth. Success doesn't erase loneliness. You can fill your pockets, but if your heart is empty, you'll still feel poor. I had to learn that the hard way. The turning point came when I started opening myself to people, not just as workers, but as human beings. I learned to sit down with my employees, ask about their families, listen to their struggles, and slowly I realized something powerful. Connection heals wounds that money never can. I also discovered the importance of friendship, real friendship, the kind that doesn't care about your bank account, your title, or your reputation. I met a few good men and women along the way who stood by me not because of what I had, but because of who I was. They reminded me that even though I had started this journey alone, I didn't have to finish it that way. At 80, I see now that relationships are the true riches of life. The laughter shared over a meal, the comfort of a hand on your shoulder when you're grieving, the joy of watching someone you love succeed. Those are the treasures I value most. And if I could give one piece of advice to anyone listening, it's this. Don't chase success so hard that you forget people. Build bridges, not just empires, because when the money is gone, it's the people who will hold you up. Loneliness may have been my greatest enemy, but connection became my greatest victory. At 80, people often look at me and see only the victories. The company, the success, the story of the orphan who made it. But what they don't see are the mistakes, the wrong turns, the broken promises, the moments that still keep me awake some nights. Yes, I built something I'm proud of, but along the way, I hurt people too. There were times I chose work over relationships, times I was too harsh with those who didn't deserve it, and times when pride blinded me from asking for help. If I could go back, I'd do some things differently. I remember one employee, a good man, who made a mistake that cost the company money. I fired him on the spot, angry and afraid of losing more. Years later, I realized I should have shown him the same mercy Mr. Harris once showed me. That memory still stings. And here's the truth most people hide. Regret is part of every success story. If someone tells you they have no regrets, they either haven't lived enough or they're lying. Mistakes are unavoidable. What matters is whether you learn from them or repeat them. I learned that apology is not weakness, it's strength. That admitting you were wrong doesn't make you smaller, it makes you human. And I learned that forgiveness, both giving it and asking for it, heals wounds that time alone never can. Looking back, my regrets are not about the money I lost or the deals that fell through. They're about the moments I didn't cherish, the words I didn't say, the people I didn't value enough while I still had the chance. So here's my advice. Don't wait until you're 80 to say, "I'm sorry." Don't wait until it's too late to tell someone you love them. Don't wait until they're gone to realize they mattered more than your pride or your business. My regrets don't define me, but they do remind me. They remind me to stay humble, to stay grateful, and to never forget that success without compassion is just another form of failure. When people talk about legacy, they often think about buildings with their names on them, bank accounts left behind, or businesses passed down to children. And sure, those things matter. But at 80, I've come to see legacy in a different light. My company will live on after me. The trucks will keep rolling, the contracts will keep moving, and the profits will keep flowing. But one day, someone will replace my name on the office door. That's just the way life works. Business is temporary. What lasts longer are the lives you touch. The kids from the orphanage who got scholarships through our foundation. The men who found second chances when no one else would hire them. The families who had food on the table because I refused to give up when times got hard. That's my real legacy. I think often about Mr. Harris, the janitor who found me bleeding in that alley and told me my story wasn't finished. He didn't leave behind millions or a company or fame, but he left behind me. His words changed my life, and through me, they've changed the lives of countless others. That's legacy. Here's what I've learned. Legacy is not about being remembered. It's about being felt. It's about planting seeds that will grow long after you're gone. It's about leaving the world a little better than you found it. So when I ask myself what I want my legacy to be, the answer is simple. I want people to know that it doesn't matter where you start. What matters is how you finish. I want the forgotten kids, the broken men, the hopeless women to hear my story and believe their story isn't finished either. At 80 years old, I don't care if the world remembers my name. I care if it remembers the hope I tried to give, because hope is the one inheritance that never runs out. At 80 years old, I wake up each morning grateful, but also aware that I have more years behind me than ahead, aware that my time on this earth is limited. When you're young, you think you're invincible, like the clock will never stop ticking. But as you grow old, you realize the clock was always ticking, you just weren't listening. There was a time when death terrified me. I thought about it at night, lying awake, asking myself if all I had fought for would just vanish when I was gone. But now I see it differently. Mortality isn't something to fear, it's something to respect. It's the reminder that every moment counts, that every word spoken might be your last chance to say what matters. I've buried friends, employees, even some of the young men and women I mentored. Each funeral was a harsh reminder that life is fragile, that tomorrow is never guaranteed. And yet, instead of breaking me, it made me live more intentionally. Here's the lesson I've learned. Death is not the enemy. Wasting life is. Too many people live like they'll never die. They postpone dreams, withhold love, bury their purpose under excuses. Then one day, time runs out, and regret is the only thing left. I don't want that. That's why I've made peace with my mortality. I know I won't live forever. But I also know I've lived fully. I've fallen, I've risen, I've given, I've loved. And when my time comes, I want to leave this world empty, empty of regrets, empty of dreams left untried, empty of words left unsaid. So if you're younger than me, and I suspect you are, don't wait for old age to remind you of death. Use it now. Let it sharpen your choices, humble your pride, and push you to love fiercely. Because the truth is, we're all terminal. The only difference is how we spend the time we have. At 80, I don't fear the end. I fear only not having lived well. And thankfully I can say I lived. If there's one word that defines my life at 80, it's gratitude. Not money, not power, not even success. Gratitude. I wake up each morning, open my eyes, and the first thought I have is, thank you. Thank you for breath in my lungs. Thank you for another sunrise. Thank you for the chance to look back and know I made it further than anyone thought I would. You see, gratitude changes the way you see everything. When I was younger, I focused on what I didn't have, the family I never knew, the money I lacked, the opportunities that slipped through my fingers. That mindset kept me bitter. But the moment I started counting what I did have, my life began to change. I'm grateful for the nuns in the orphanage who, even without warmth, gave me food when they could. I'm grateful for the strangers who handed me a sandwich when I was starving. I'm grateful for Mr. Harris and his mop, for the words that still echo in my heart. Your story isn't finished. And I'm grateful for the failures, too, the betrayals, the bankruptcies, the bruises, because without them, I would never have learned resilience. Without them, I would never have discovered my strength. Here's what I've learned. Gratitude doesn't change your circumstances, but it changes you. It turns scarcity into sufficiency. It turns bitterness into peace. And it turns ordinary moments into miracles. I look at the faces of the people I helped along the way, the employees who built lives through the company, the kids who got scholarships, the families who kept their dignity because I refused to quit, and my heart overflows. At 80, I can't run like I used to, I can't lift like I used to, but I can still smile. I can still say thank you, and that's enough. So my advice is this: practice gratitude daily, even for the smallest things. One day, you'll realize it was the small things that were the big things all along. As I grew older, I realized something important. Knowledge that dies with you is wasted. What good are the lessons I bled for, the wisdom I earned through decades of failure and victory, if I don't pass them on? That's why, in my later years, I became more than a businessman. I became a mentor. Young men and women would come to my office, nervous, their eyes full of questions. Some were employees, others just dreamers looking for direction. They wanted to know how I did it, how the orphan with nothing built an empire. I could have handed them a list of strategies, but instead I told them stories. Stories of hunger, of betrayal, of picking myself off the ground when quitting seemed easier, because stories stick where instructions fade. I told them, don't wait for someone to choose you, choose yourself. I told them, hard work doesn't guarantee success, but laziness guarantees failure. And I told them the same words Mr. Harris told me all those years ago. Your story isn't finished. Some of those kids went on to build businesses of their own. Others became leaders in their communities. A few came back years later, shaking my hand with tears in their eyes, telling me my words had saved them. And every time I thought of Mr. Harris. He never knew how far his kindness would travel, but through me his legacy lived on. Here's the lesson. Mentorship is one of the most powerful investments you can make. Money. For most of my life, I ran from the boy I used to be, the orphan, the forgotten one, the kid nobody wanted. I buried him under hard work, under money, under the image of success. But no matter how far I climbed, his shadow always followed me. It took me decades to realize that healing doesn't come from running, it comes from facing. And so, one quiet afternoon, in my late 70s, I drove back to the old orphanage. The building was still there, though the paint was peeling and the playground rusted with time. I stood at the gate where 16-year-old me once slipped away, terrified but determined. I walked the halls, and memories came flooding back, the cracked ceilings, the cold dinners, the sound of footsteps echoing in the night. I could almost see that boy again, lying on his mattress, whispering, "I'll matter one day." And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel anger. I felt compassion. I closed my eyes and said out loud, "You made it. You were never forgotten. I carried you with me every step of the way." That was the moment I forgave the world for not choosing me. More importantly, it was the moment I forgave myself for doubting, for hating, for carrying bitterness so long. Here's the lesson. You cannot build a peaceful future if you're still at war with your past. Reconciliation doesn't change what happened, but it changes how it lives inside you. At 80, I finally understand. That boy wasn't my weakness. He was my foundation. Without his hunger, I wouldn't have fought so hard. Without his loneliness, I wouldn't value connection. Without his pain, I wouldn't have found my purpose. So now when I tell my story, I don't hide him anymore. I honor him, because the orphan boy I once was is the reason the man I became exists. Now at 80 years old, my story has come full circle. From the cracked ceilings of an orphanage to the boardrooms of a company. From nights of hunger to tables filled with food. From being invisible to being remembered. If there's one truth I've learned, it's this. Life is not about how you start, it's about how you finish. I wasn't chosen as a boy, but I chose myself as a man. I wasn't given love, but I learned to give it. I wasn't handed opportunity, but I created it. And if I could do it, so can you. Don't mistake me. My story isn't one of perfection, it's one of resilience. I failed, I fell, I bled, but every time I stood back up, because I carried with me the words that saved me all those years ago. Your story isn't finished. And now, as I sit in the twilight of my life, I don't measure success by the size of my company or the weight of my bank account. I measure it by the people I helped, the lives I touched, the hope I spread. That is the real legacy I leave behind. So to you listening now, wherever you are, maybe you're broken, maybe forgotten, maybe standing in the middle of your own storm, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not finished. Your beginning does not define your ending. Your scars do not define your worth, and your past does not cancel your future. I am living proof that even the most forgotten boy can rise, proof that pain can turn into purpose, proof that what was meant to break you can become the very thing that builds you. My name may fade with time, but the message will remain. Don't quit, don't give up. Your story isn't finished. Because if an orphan nobody wanted could become a man nobody could ignore, imagine what you can become.